Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Radio Europa. I'm your host, Will, from England, and today I'm joined by Laura from England and Henrique from Portugal. We're going to be talking about various things involving Salvini. He's been in the news a lot lately with one thing or another. Laura's going to talk about that in a minute. And then we're going to get into something we don't normally cover, non-European topics, but because this has implications for a European diaspora, we're going to talk about the Brazilian presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro. So that should be a good fun. So Laura, if I can hand over to you and talk about Salvini.
Yeah, thank you. So there's been quite a lot that's happened with Salvini over the last couple of weeks. So I thought it would be good to kind of correlate them into one episode and get all the news out there. So basically, he's just been falling out with people left, right, and centre. And the first person that he's fallen out with is Merkel, because the Italian media are reporting that approximately 40,000 migrants will be repatriated from Germany to Italy. They're reporting that they will be arriving by plane and they're scheduled to land in Rome. So Salvini, in true Salvini fashion, has said that he will close the airports just like he closed the ports. So that's upset quite a lot of people. German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer has said that no repatriation flights to Italy are planned. And Luigi Di Maio, who's obviously Italy's other deputy prime minister, has said that no agreement has been signed. But Salvini has tweeted, "If anyone in Brussels or Berlin is thinking of dumping dozens of immigrants into Italy through unauthorised charter flights, they should know there is not and will not be any airport available. We will close the airports like we closed the ports." And then he's doing the hashtag again, hashtag airports closed. So obviously under the Dublin Treaty, migrants are supposed to seek asylum in the first European country where they disembark. And because obviously Italy's on the southern coast, they've kind of had it the toughest, really. And they've already taken in over 600,000 migrants over the last 4 years. And so the numbers have actually dropped this year since Salvini took over in, I think it was June that they got into power. So the numbers have actually dropped by about from 107,000 last year to only 21,000 this year. Stefan Reichel, who is president of the German NGO, which is also called Matteo, he's called Salvini a racist and neo-fascist. And he said that the migrants that he looks after in Germany are actually scared of being deported to Italy, because they're all spreading rumours around and hearing that it's horrible over there. So that's the first story, really. Do you have any thoughts on that, or anything to add, or should I just keep reporting the stories?
Yeah, it's interesting that, because Germany will say, "Oh, we want to get rid of X number of migrants who should have claimed asylum in Italy," but if the migrants are sort of saying between themselves, like, "Oh, we really don't want to go to Italy because, well, the government doesn't want us," it's kind of like pass the parcel, isn't it? And we're going to end up with some tug of war for a group of people that Germany doesn't want, Italy doesn't want. But nobody seems to be, well, Salvini might be, but nobody seems to be stating the obvious course of action, which is send them back to Africa or the Middle East.
Yeah, and I just think it's fascinating that the migrants don't even want to go to Italy. Like, it shows how desperate they are, doesn't it, for like accommodation and safety, if they're saying, "Oh, we don't want to go to Italy because we won't be treated properly there." So I just think Salvini's doing completely the right thing. And I think if we all did this, then it would send a message that you don't even risk your lives coming over here, because apparently they've been saying things like there's no shelter and they're not organised and we'll have to sleep on the streets, there's no medical care and things like that. So they just don't want to go to Italy. So that's the first story. The second is Salvini met up with Marine Le Pen, who's obviously leader of France's Rassemblement National, who were the National Front, and they changed their name. And they met up to discuss an alternative to Europe. And that was Monday, the 8th of October in Rome that they met up. So Le Pen has basically said that we're not fighting against Europe and we want some kind of communication between European countries, but we're fighting against the European Union, which is described as being too totalitarian. Salvini's fallen out with Juncker, called him an alcoholic, and he said, I never raise my tone, I do not raise my tone, and I do not raise my glass. I don't do anything wrong. This gentleman is the head of the government that presides over 500 million Europeans. He's a man who comes from a tax haven like Luxembourg. The fact that Italians have to depend on the mood of a guy who was minister in Luxembourg seems strange to me. And then he said, if you type in Google Juncker sober or Juncker stumbling, you will see sometimes impressive images. Have you seen those pictures of Juncker apparently drunk?
Well, there's been a number over the years, haven't there? And I think somebody in the European Union recently had to go at the British media because they always say that he's pissed. But apparently he was dizzy after a meal and needed some assistance in walking, or he's got a problem with his leg or something. But it's all nonsense. And the guy clearly takes comfort in one or two few many drinks, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it's not like he doesn't look in pain, or you can tell when somebody's drunk, can't you? It's just a clear cover story that they've got where they're saying that that's why he can't walk. But I've seen him like flick people's ties and just acting really stupid and stuff. And he's clearly drunk, and I think it's just some sort of cover story that the media put out there, to try and cover up the fact that he's got an alcohol problem. But Salvini obviously seems to think that he does have an alcohol problem. So with Le Pen and Salvini, when they met up in Rome last week, one thing that's interesting is that Le Pen seems to be against Steve Bannon's plans to spark a populist revolt in Europe. And Le Pen has said that she's rejected this movement and that it's not up to an American to save Europe. Salvini, on the other hand, he seems a little bit warmer towards Bannon. He met up with him, obviously, in Rome last month. What are your thoughts on that? Because have you read much about this plan of Bannon's?
Yeah, well, I know Bannon's been sort of dotting around Europe recently, and he spoke to a crowd in France, and he's been trying to establish a sort of what he calls a populist think tank or a nationalist think tank. But I think he used the word populist. And to be honest, I've got to say I agree with Le Pen on this because, well, number one, it's not up to an American to sort out Europe, not least because as an American, he doesn't understand, he cannot possibly understand or appreciate the problems and the solutions for Europe because you only understand that from living and being involved in Europe for a number of years. But also because I think the aims of America or Americans and their innate prejudices can never be detached from what they want for Europe. So what Bannon's solution for Europe will always be something that suits the United States. But what suits the United States is probably not what suits Europe. And I think there's better minds to look for a solution, like the works of the French New Right with Guy Lanfay and Alain de Benoit. Their theories about the solution for Europe are much better and different to Bannon's.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of the conversations that I've had with Americans as well, not all Americans, but some of them, about nationalism, is that they don't kind of seem to appreciate or even understand in a way the differences between Europeans. And I mean, some do. Greg Johnson's fantastic when he speaks about it, and so people like Rams Paul. But I don't. I think if Americans have never really been to Europe, and there are quite a lot of them on Twitter, like the MAGA ones, they don't really seem to understand that the British are different to the Swedish, who are different to the Italians, who are different to the Spanish, and that's one thing that I sometimes wonder whether Americans kind of get as much as we do. And like I say, some do, some really do get that, but some don't, and I worry if that's an issue.
Well, definitely, and because America, white nationalism, for instance, is probably quite suitable for European Americans because if they were to say like, oh, I'm a French American or a German American, then you end up playing some game of reductionism until you're like standing over there with three people who are the same as you, and then everybody else is different. So I can understand white nationalism for them, but you know, the stuff around Brexit in particular, whilst I actually am starting to think there's a problem with that, but the stuff around Brexit has established that there's irreconcilable differences between different parts of Europe that can't be achieved with a collective nationalism. There's got to be cooperation, but recognition of difference, and that's something that Bannon wouldn't appreciate.
Yeah, so there's two more quick stories from Italy to do with Salvini. So the first one is Italy's first black politician, Cecile Kyenge. I think I'm pronouncing that right. She moved to Italy in 1983 from the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's been sued by Salvini. So in 2014, she had a couple of incidents where she was subject to racial abuse from members of Lega Party. So she was compared to an orangutan, and a comment was made where she about her imposing tribal conditions on Italy. So that was done by individual members of League, and she's come out and said in response in 2014 that the whole party is racist. So Salvini's decided to sue her for defamation of staining the entire party, really, rather than just picking out a couple of individual members. And she's been called into court to fight this court battle. But the interesting thing about this is 40 black MPs, so this includes people like David Lammy and Diane Abbott over in Britain, they've written an open letter to The Guardian supporting her. And the first line of the letter is, "As black elected representatives and community leaders from across Europe." And it's the whole collectivism versus individualism thing again, isn't it? And it's just, do you have any thoughts on that? They all just seem to kind of come together to defend their own, and every other group can do it apart from white people, can't they?
But I think it's positive in a way, because, and I always say to a friend of mine that people like David Lammy are the best adverts for us. They're the best propaganda for us, because people will see this. They'll see all these Africans that pretend to be from all these different European countries all suddenly come together and say, oh, hang on a minute, we're actually Africans. And it's like, fantastic, because number one, you're telling the world that you're not really English or French or Italian, you're Africans. And number two, and every action has a reaction, and hopefully that the collective identity of the African population, wherever they might be in Europe, can provoke an equal reaction of collective identity from Europeans. So in that respect, more power to them. Keep going, you know.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should definitely be trying to highlight. Like every time they do it, just look at this collectivism between Africans, because you don't notice it, I don't think, unless you actually look for it. Or I think I hate to use the word normie, but if you're kind of not politically attuned, it just seems kind of normal, really, for them to be saying that. But once you highlight it and say, look, it's okay for black people to say this, or it's okay for Jewish people to say this, then you do kind of click, well, white people aren't allowed to say that, and why not? So the last story, I've not been able to find much information on this, but there has been an explosion in Italy, and there was one in August. It was claimed by an anarchist group, and it was detonated on the 16th of August, I believe, in front of the provincial Italian headquarters of Salvini's League Party. And so that was classed as left-wing terrorism. And then on Saturday night, the weekend that's just gone, there was another letter bomb which exploded in front of Salvini's headquarters again. The media have just completely ignored this. I can't find any stories on it at all, apart from one article from Austria. So two alleged perpetrators have been identified and reported. So I imagine that they're going to be tried for that. But there's just bombs going off in Italy, and they're being targeted at Salvini, obviously with the intention of hurting him and hurting his party. But the media are just completely silent on it. I mean, I will have another look and see if I can find any more articles, and we'll post them underneath in the link if I can. But have you seen this in the media at all?
I haven't. Henrik, what about you? Have you seen much about this one?
Well, there's been several cases where politicians get attempts on their life. They usually get bomb threats and so on. And it actually happened last month, also in Brazil, where the candidate was stabbed stuff during a campaign, Bolsonaro. But it's Italy, it's Europe. We are seeing a lot of far left movements rising in Europe and trying to basically wipe out opposition.
Yeah, it's just another good example to use to highlight the bias of the media, because we focus a lot on Islamic terrorism, obviously, us people on the right, but the mainstream media and the establishment want to focus on right-wing terrorism, and I think left-wing terrorism kind of gets ignored by everyone sometimes. But these stories, they're slipping through the net, and they do happen more often than you think. But as I said, the media just ignore them. So that's one to look out for. And if you don't follow Salvini on Twitter, you're missing out really, because he's probably the best account on Twitter, and he does report all these stories. He's always posting selfies and saying things like, "They're trying to attack me, but I'm not going to let them get me down," and things like that. So he's a great guy to follow on Twitter if you do want to keep up with the news in Italy. But that's it really. That's all the news from Italy from the last couple of weeks. I'll pass over to you, William, if that's okay, and you can move on to the next topic.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Laura. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking today about the frontrunner in Brazil's presidential election, Jair Bolsonaro. I think I'm pronouncing his first name right, but I'm sure Henrique will correct me in a minute if I'm not. Just a little background on Bolsonaro. So the media like to call him Brazil's answer to Trump. He's right-wing. He says some quite outlandish things. The media like to report on his comments about homosexuality and things like that. But the man himself, so he was born in 1955. He served 17 years in the Brazilian army, reaching the rank of captain. And he's been involved in politics since 1989, where he was... I'm not quite sure exactly what he was. He was a councillor of some sort for 2 years, and then he became federal MP for Rio de Janeiro in 1991, a position he retains until this day. He did well in the first round of the presidential election. I think he got 46% of the vote, which was about 15 points ahead of the next challenger. So he's odds on to win the second round, which I think is on the 28th of October. So, Henrique, Bolsonaro, interesting guy. Do you want to tell the listeners just a bit more about what he stands for? What are his political positions on the important things?
Well, as you said, he's basically a politician that has been there for quite a long time. However, he's seen as an outsider because he has such strong views on many societal issues that still are much of a taboo here in the West, even to discuss it, based on homosexuality, criminal activity, and so on. He wants chemical castration for pedophiles. He's basically a very loose card for the Brazilian establishment, and he's definitely scaring a lot of people, especially in the media, either Brazilian media or general media. And he's basically the Trump of the tropics, as I've said. So he's a wild card there.
Yeah, well, he seems pretty interesting, that's for sure. I know that he's allegedly quite pro-American, pro-military, law and order, that sort of thing. But just on his sort of voter base, what sort of demographics voting for Bolsonaro? Because I know that Christians obviously voting for him in quite large numbers, evangelical Christians. But what about the racial aspect of his voter base?
Yeah, you can divide up his Brazilian vote in many ways, through regions, through ethnic groups, let's say like that, through ideologies, the conservatives, the Christians. But yes, mainly the main core demographic of his voting base are the European Brazilians, the Brazilians of European descent, except in the Northeast, where in the most northern region of the country, where they still vote left because they're really poor up there, and they keep believing in the far leftist party. But you can basically divide up this in racial categories and put all of the European Brazilians on the Bolsonaro side, mostly the European Brazilians. And people in general discontent with the establishment, the way things are going. So much violence in the major Brazilian cities and so on. People are fed up with the establishment, and they don't care if he says petty or mean things like Trump does to minorities and so on. People just want a better job, good health conditions, good education, and so on.
Yeah, I thought that would be the case with the fact that European Brazilians vote for him in higher numbers than any other group. I mean, because you're able to access the Portuguese language media better than most of us. Do you know, has he said much on the topic of race? Does he have any particular views on that, or is it just sort of by implication?
Yeah, so Bolsonaro is quite a colorful guy. He said that he will never let his kids marry a person from a different race. He said a lot of things against racial mixing, which is one of the main groups of Brazil are the mixed race. They make up some 43% of the whole country. And, it's basically a reflection of things are going in Brazil. Back in the 40s, just like the US, Brazil had the largest percents of European Americans, basically the whites, which were at 63%. In the US, it was the peak also in the 40s, not 90%. And now it's basically at 47% in Brazil. So the numbers are getting very, very low, below the 50% threshold. And, it's a reflection of the fear on the people and the chaotic things which Brazil is in right now.
Wow, I didn't know that it was 47%. I mean, that's I knew it was lower than the US, but I didn't realize it was that low. So really, this is like the last chance saloon for European Brazilians to elect a candidate that will be behind their interests. And it's positive that he has made explicit statements on race, especially race mixing, because that's going to become a problem in Europe as well soon. The other element to his candidacy, which I think many people have picked up on, is the fact that he's often said positive things about the military dictatorship which ruled Brazil from 64 to 85. I pulled up some quote earlier that apparently in the 90s he said that if he ever became president, he would start a military coup on the very first day. I mean, people have different views on the roles of parliament and democracy, but just generally speaking, what do you think? I mean, do you think there's any possibility that he would dissolve the National Assembly at some point, or do you think that it's a lot of scaremongering by the media and that he's now a democratic kind of guy?
Well, in my opinion, it's basically scaremongering. The media is very hot on this, so it's normal that they went back to his military background, to his former quotes on how things are bad in Brazil, or we would make a coup in there. But I think that if he's going through the trouble of going through his democratic elections, he would probably not attempt a coup right now, because basically the elections are legitimizing him. And also the only way I see it happening, it's if violence in Brazil becomes so bad, robbery, murder, so on. Brazil right now has a higher murder rate than countries at war. If it got even worse, maybe I can see him put some kind of martial law to put things in order. But right now, how things are going, I don't think so. I think it's mostly scaremongering from the media to not vote in him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the usual playbook, isn't it? They pick the right wing candidate, and they're like, oh look, he's a fascist, he's a not democratic, and so yeah, that's I can understand that. One thing that a lot of people have overlooked in their excitement around his candidacy is his views on things that we probably think less of, generally speaking, like environmentalism. So, but I know that environmentalism is a big factor for a lot of nationalists. So I was reading about what his advisors have said and what he said on this, and So he seems to support clean energy like nuclear and hydroelectric power, which is obviously a plus from the environmental standpoint. However, there's been reports that his advisors have said that he wants to chop into the Amazon and enact some quite large scale deforestation in order to expand energy production into that region. I mean, do you think that that's a problem for Brazil, and do you think that he will actually go ahead and do something like that?
Yeah, I'm going to be brutally honest. He's mainly an industrialist, In regards to environment, I actually went through his campaign, and basically he wants for the environment ministry to be abolished and be basically merged with the agricultural one. So that tells a lot, actually. There's been a very large agricultural boom, mainly in the center-west regions of Brazil, to harvest soy and corn and so on. Brazil is basically becoming an agrarian power because China has a lot of hunger of those things, and basically he wouldn't mind to chop off the Amazon, but he likely won't. The Amazon is such a good force in Brazil, not just for tourism, but it's a good way of checking on drug trafficking groups, and establishing a well-defined and dense border against far leftist groups like in Colombia and troubles with Venezuela and so on. So basically, Brazilians have the Amazon as a high esteem in their country. The green in their flag basically represents that jungle. So in a sense, it probably will wreck the Amazon a bit, but it won't be to such an alarmist scale as the media is portraying. Yeah.
I mean, with that one, I think it's a case of picking your battles, and obviously law and order and racial issues are more at the forefront in Brazil than environmentalism, because they've still got a vast amount of green space. So on that basis, you'd have to say that we can forget about that part, because the more important aspect of his campaign is law and order and race issues. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how that one develops, but it's probably a secondary issue. The other thing that I kind of want to play devil's advocate on a little bit is he is quite pro-American and pro-Western. Now, the danger, of course, is that translates into pro-Western foreign policy and essentially becoming like a South American vassal of the United States, because we know that the United States has often liked to play around in South America and military coups here and putting their candidates in place and whatever. And some often say that Pinochet was very much an American puppet. I mean, do you think that with Bolsonaro that there is a danger that he could slip into that category, or do you think he's too independently minded for that kind of thing?
Well, I think that Bolsonaro, he served in the military. He doesn't. He went into high ranks, so I don't think that he likes to be bossed around. I think that he has his main game for Latin America. Brazil, it's the biggest country there. It's a regional power in South America. He basically already threatened to put economic sanctions in Venezuela through their custom union, which is Mercosur. And I think that he is his main guy. He might take some advice, but I don't think that he will be a puppet of the US. He might be a puppet from some other states, not in the Americas, but I think that he will be the main person in charge for Brazilian foreign policy.
Yeah, good. I mean, I hope so, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will hope so as well, because it's no use winning a victory if it's going to mean subservience to a liberal order that we don't like. But as you said, as a military man, and he seems a really strong-minded character, so hopefully, and of course, added to that, Brazil is a regional power. So with all that combined, hopefully he shouldn't be too vulnerable to anything like that. I think we've covered the main things that I wanted to bring up about Bolsonaro. Before we sign off, is there anything else you want to talk about related to him for the listeners' benefit or anything?
Yeah, sure. I basically wanted to say, why do the Brazilian elections matter? The Brazilian elections matter because it's basically a glimpse into the future. What the main problems Brazilians are seeing right now, it's probably what the US listeners or the European listeners, I hope not. But it's what we will face in the future if these current demographic trends continue. So it will be very interesting to see how the main Brazilians are responding to this crisis, and how will they solve it or will not solve it. So basically, we Europeans and Americans should pick up our notebooks and start writing what they are doing, because it will be quite useful for the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's definitely something we should look at as Europeans, that I mean, Brazil is in a much worse shape than we are demographically, but they've still got a hope of doing something about it with this guy. So don't lose hope, even if your demographic situation is pretty poor, because it ain't as poor as Brazil's, and they're going to do something about it. But anyway, on with Bolsonaro, of course, we wish him the best of luck for the end of October. Hope he wins, because that'll be a big victory for sort of nationalism worldwide. And thanks again to Laura for talking about Salvini. There's some really interesting things going on there. It'll be interesting to see what happens with those migrants that Berlin wants to send back. But in any case, thanks for listening, everybody. And as I said in previous episodes, we are entirely funded by our listeners and readers, and we don't take any profit for ourselves. Every donation goes back, invested back into the project, so that we can continue to bring you the articles and the podcasts that we do. So if you do want to donate, help us out. The links will be in the description below. And on that note, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. And thanks, Henrique and Laura, for joining me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Adeus.